Tonight, diplomacy, warfare, legacy, they all collide. Donald Trump has just announced a second summit with Vladimir Putin in the Hungarian city of Budapest as his attention turns from the Middle East back to the war in Ukraine. Tomorrow, he'll host President Zelensky of Ukraine at the White House. Could this 1-2 diplomatic punch really see Donald Trump end a second war in a week? Well, many are sceptical. We've been here before. Tomorrow's meeting, of course, comes less than a year after that explosive Oval Office showdown.
We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war,
you're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
And last time that President Trump met Putin, that historic summit in Alaska over the summer, well, there was hope things could move on. But then, since then, it's back to stalemate. There's been very little movement. There's been a lot of dithering. But yesterday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had this sharp warning from NATO.
Now, if this war does not end, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States, along with our allies, will take the steps necessary to impose costs on Russia for its continued aggression.
And now Trump is considering flying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. These missiles could hit Moscow. Quite the escalation for a man that said he could end this war in a week. So where are we for the self-declared president of peace? Now, joining me tonight in the studio, just about, Katie Pavlich, author, commentator, journalist extraordinaire, editor of townhall.com. You were travelling with the president last week on his first peace mission. We'll get onto that in a second. But let's, can you fill us in what's happened today with President Putin, the phone call, 2-hour phone call.
Yes.
And teeing up what's going to happen tomorrow. Zelensky's back in the White House. As we discussed before the break, you know, these things can go two ways.
Yes.
What do you reckon is going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, so Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be at the White House tomorrow for one of many meetings he's had with President Trump since his getting back into the White House for a second term. President Trump announced today that he has had a phone call with President Putin over the last couple of months. He said that he soured on their relationship. He thought it was a good one, and he said he came into office thinking that the Ukraine-Russia war would be the easiest thing to solve, not Gaza, Israel, but this situation that has proven not to be the case, so they're still working on it. But the big change this week is that when the president was on the plane going to Israel and Egypt for that peace summit, he talked about how he'd be willing to give the Ukrainians Tomahawk missiles if Russia doesn't want to come to the table in good faith to actually end this war, which of course would give the Ukrainians a new advantage to take out missile launch sites in Russia, to reach other military sites.
Reach Moscow, right?
Exactly. And the difference is that the Ukrainians would be targeting military sites, whereas the Russians are targeting civilian sites in addition to the military. So high stakes. The president also announced he's willing to meet with Putin in Budapest if the negotiators who are going to meet, I believe, tomorrow or the next day, have some progress moving forward. So they're all still working on it, but certainly not where he wanted to be at this point, and he's doing all he can after the Anchorage summit to push Putin to end the war.
So you think the Tomahawks is sort of mood music before the summit? Because we've been here before, haven't we? Exactly what happened with Alaska is that they had a nice, sort of conversation, lots of backslapping, behind the scenes. Everyone said, great, there's going to be a Zelensky meeting, there's going to be this three-way bilat, there's going to be all things. And then it just all went a bit quiet. Putin did what Putin best said. Yeah, no, of course I want peace. Everyone wants peace, but, it's peace on my terms. We've got to look at the sort of causes of the war. Zelensky's an illegitimate leader. I won't negotiate with him. And he just drags it on and drags it on and drags it on. And then basically waiting till, allowing himself more and more time to push that line further and further into Ukraine before negotiations start. What's the feeling? You are incredibly plugged in. What is the feeling in the administration tonight, after the phone call and ahead of the meeting tomorrow, that this is going to be any different?
Well, the front lines really haven't changed in years. So that's, they're arguing with Russia that, look, you're not making any progress. You're actually losing a war that you were supposed to win immediately when you started it. You're losing it. The president, after the Anchorage summit, after the last meeting with Zelensky at the White House, actually said that he thinks Ukraine can win the war, which would take back all of their territory, which was a huge change from what had been said before.
And also possibly not realistic.
yeah, well, yeah.
Without the right equipment.
Right. So I think just ahead of tomorrow, the administration is looking to pressure Putin into coming to the table because they want to give the Ukrainians more military force that's been slow-walked, starting with the Biden administration. So if you're going to give them Tomahawk missiles, that changes the dynamics of the war, and allows it puts Russia on the map as a legitimate target in terms of inside the country, which has been limited in previous months. So in terms of what they get out of tomorrow, the Zelensky's going to ask for those Tomahawks, and President Trump will make a decision either tomorrow or after he meets with Putin about whether to send them. And the other change that we've seen too, and this occurred after the NATO summit in June in The Hague, which is that Trump is no longer sending money to Ukraine. We're selling weapons to NATO, and they're paying us for them, and they're transferring them. So that's also a big difference.
That's quite Trumpy, though, isn't it?
It is.
Everything needs a business.
So we're involved, but we're not involved in terms of paying for this anymore.
So spinning back to the other great deal of the week, the other great conflict resolution, remarkable Truth Social from the president tonight that says, basically, he's basically urging Hamas to disarm now. Obviously, we're seeing skirmishes and open fighting between clans and gangs and anti-Hamas forces within Gaza. He said tonight, "Put down your arms, or we will disarm you." Who's we? Well, I mean, that's the first time I think I've ever heard him suggest that the Americans could, get involved. But we're going to see. I thought he wanted to build a casino and a Riviera in Gaza.
Well, you can't do that if
Not
Hamas
bomb
is
it,
there, which they've made clear. That is a very serious statement by the president, saying we will come in and kill you if you don't disarm. You had CENTCOM yesterday putting out a warning to Hamas directly, saying if they don't disarm, that there will be problems. So that's the first time throughout this war you've seen the United States military directly threaten Hamas. But behind the scenes, the bigger picture here is it's not just about the Gaza Strip in terms of the peace plan. This is about other countries also pressuring Hamas, in particular Qatar and Turkey, to essentially, leash their animals because they have supported them financially, they've supported them ideologically, to get them to disarm. Now, whether that will actually happen voluntarily is probably pretty slim, given that they are a terrorist organization whose entire mission is to murder and
to wipe Israel off the map.
Well, and for them, you're fighting an enemy that it doesn't matter if they're killed because that's martyrdom for them. So it's very difficult to deal with that. But the president's main goal was to get the living hostages out. They are out now. And phase 2 of the plan has never been, we won't come back if you don't cooperate. It's always been, we'll come back if you don't.
Exactly on that. There was that, obviously the hostages out, great. But is there a certain naivety to as you kind of say, you're dealing with a death cult here. Is there a certain naivety to expecting Hamas to really skip into the sunset and, and just leave Gaza forever? Yes, they've given that remarkable offer that not to prosecute them. But are we not just going to see the same guys with the same guns and the same berets and hats, or whatever, the green things they wear, just change their name, rebrand?
When they put their uniforms back on.
Oh, yeah, funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Weird, yeah, very odd. Suddenly, driving BMWs down the road, where were they all through the last year? But are we not just going to see whatever Hamas just rebrand and remerge and take control of Gaza? How is this actually going to be enforced? Obviously, they're looking at this sort of, having Trump lead this sort of committee. Tony Blair, I think, is out of the running now a little bit because there's backlash in the Middle East. But how are they actually going to enforce this without, as we're getting involved?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a naivete. They're trying to push a diplomatic solution before they have to go to a military solution. They are not naive at all about who Hamas is and what they've been dealing with, which is why they've been so frustrated with France and Keir Starmer of the UK, who have sabotaged all along by enabling Hamas and trying to say they should have a country and calling them a political force rather than a terrorist group. But in terms of how they actually disarm Hamas, we've seen from the president, he says but we also know throughout the last week and the lead up to this, including at the UN, when the president had a very serious meeting with all of the Arab and Gulf states, it's up on them to figure out this problem.
Yeah.
It's no longer Israel's problem. It's not the United States' problem. If you guys want to move your countries forward in an economic, commercial fashion, you cannot have terrorists running the show in any part of the Middle East.
No, of course, totally. Take us behind the scenes last week. You were there. There was that remarkable moment where Donald Trump brought Keir Starmer to the stage, and it was almost sort of as if he was about to speak, and then sort of slapped him back down and said, "Go sit down." There is a lot of tension behind the scenes. I mean, obviously, Carney in Canada, the French, the Brits. You know, they were all kind of saying, "Oh, well, behind the scenes, we played a really important role."
They did not.
Exactly, and that must have wound the president up, right?
Yes, because it's so dishonest, A.
Yeah.
B, they actually, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was saying for weeks that their efforts to appease Hamas had sabotaged peace talks. This could have happened earlier, that it made it more difficult to get the living hostages out, to put pressure on Hamas because they were rewarding their barbaric terrorism and behavior. But it was really funny because when I was on the plane with the president coming back from the Egyptian summit, where the 35 plus countries were there, and he had that row with Macron when he said, "Oh, you're taking a low profile,
gripping him by the hand,
pulling him back and forth, embarrassing Keir Starmer and making it seem like he was going to come up to speak and pushing him back essentially." And on the plane, he said, "There's a lot of weak countries I'm not happy with." And I said, "Well, do you want to name any of the leaders you're unhappy with?" And he stopped short of naming them. And then I asked him, "Do you want to name the countries?" And he said, "You can probably figure out which countries I'm talking about." And I think that is so. It goes to the name of your show. Watching the way these Western countries have handled the situation versus the Arab states and the Gulf states is just, the contrast could not be clearer. And you speak about naivete. I'm not sure it's naivete or if it's just enabling or cowardice. But the Western countries that are supposed to be standing up against this have been caving, and those who are in the region are saying, you're clearly not speaking their language and you shouldn't be rewarding their behavior. Yeah,
I thought Netanyahu made that point very clearly at the when Trump was addressing the parliament in Jerusalem. That just at the moment that actually Israel needed its friends, whatever it is, internal political pressure, demographic pressure in the United Kingdom for sure, in marginal Labour seats, obviously putting a lot of pressure on the Labour government, on Labour MPs. Macron's got his own issues. Don't know what Carney was up to. Seemed to have gone along with it just for the ride.
It's a leftist.
Well, there is probably
that's
the
key thread here.
And it's just at that moment that Israel needed its friends that actually they got Donald Trump. Because if they hadn't have got Donald Trump, the sort of Western alliance, the sort of the NATO countries are looking like they were sort of filtering away. And so you can't, this idea, this suggestion that, it was Biden's plan repackaged and they just...
it's a joke.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, he is full within his rights to claim credit for this one, right?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that Joe Biden himself came out to try and say this was part of a plan that we've been working on. We worked very hard to get these hostages home. It is actually a situation of what nerve. Joe Biden, after October 7th, slow-walked the response by the Israelis, just like he did in Ukraine, against the bad guys, and therefore, dragged out the war, made it last longer. He appeased this pro-Hamas faction, pro-terrorism faction we have here in the United States. He stood on the stage of the DNC convention last August and said the people outside who are cheering for Hamas, who are saying death to the IDF, who are saying death to America, who are ripping down American flags in the nation's capital, burning them at Union Station, and then hoisting up the flag that the Hamas terrorists wear in the Gaza Strip now and when they went into Israel on October 7th, kidnapping and murdering dozens of Americans. He said they have a point. So for him now to come out and say that he somehow had anything to do with this when he was the reason why this happened and the reason why the response was slow because he wanted to, he withheld heavy bombs, he withheld weapons, he equated both sides. It's a rewriting of history that just doesn't add up with the facts at all.
Do you think do you think he'll be able to apply that star quality, that unique diplomacy, the show business, the actual business, the brute force quality that he has? Do you think he's on a roll now? Do you think the president's going to get a breakthrough in the coming weeks in Ukraine?
He's doing his best, but, Vladimir Putin is happy to challenge him. And Putin has nuclear weapons. It's a totally different ballgame. He has his own mission and his own vision of what Ukraine is. He very deeply believes that Ukraine is part of Russia. It's not Ukraine, and that he's willing to sacrifice as many soldiers as he has to keep the war going.
And he's converted the entire Russian economy into a war economy now. So
Exactly.
the war machine needs feeding.
There may be some, extra sanctions they can put on to pressure him further on the economy, issuing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine.
Well, I think that's going to be
pressure him
I think
into
that's from the rhetoric that President Trump had in the campaign to arming Ukraine with missiles that can take out apartment buildings in Moscow suburbs. It's a remarkable turnaround.
Yeah, well, I think the goal is to show Putin that we're not going to take out apartments because he doesn't necessarily care about his own civilians being killed.
Yeah, but I mean,
their military infrastructure.
Exactly.